My name is Donal Ryan, and this is a chapter from my book, The Spinning Heart, and the chapter is called Vassia. There is no flatness in this land. It is all small hills and hidden valleys. Birds sing that I cannot see. They hide in trees and fly in covered skies. The horizon is close and small. There is daily rain that makes the earth green. Even in winter it is green. A short journey in any direction ends at the sea. I went one Sunday with a man I worked with and his family to the sea. I stood looking at the waves crashing on the beach for too long. I heard his child asking what I was doing. He hushed her. The man's wife scolded him for bringing me. She thought I couldn't understand. She was right and wrong. I didn't know the words, just their meaning. In this country, I speak in sentences of 2 words or 3. I nod and smile often, and I feel redness in my face when spoken to. When I worked each day on building sites, Foreman would point at things and ask, with his eyebrows raised, for understanding. I almost always knew then what to do. Their voices are fast. My mother's mother spoke that way, in a dialect of a tribe of reindeer herders from far north of my family's ground. She was full of wonder at our goats and cattle and horses. When we were children, we would laugh at her strange, speeding tongue, and my father would chase us from the camp. We would be banished to the fire's outer ring, where the cold and heat battled. And still we'd laugh, and my father would shout warnings from inside the camp. He was very fond of my mother's mother. He had travelled north to bring her to live with us when we received word of my grandfather's death. The foreman's voice is soft and contradicts his appearance. He's younger than me, but he reminds me of my father. The big work is gone now. Many things are left unfinished. Some days of the month, he asks me to help him to repair work that was done too quickly. I'm called the Russian here, as almost everyone is from other countries. I don't mind. On the plain where I was born, all of our faces look the same to foreigners. The Latvians take offence and complain bitterly among themselves about slights best forgotten. The Russian and Polish men speak good English and try to explain the differences. No one here has heard of Caucasia. The Irishmen laugh all day while they work and shout across the sights at each other in whooping voices. There was a man called Shani who would slap me on the shoulder and shout in a sing-song voice and make the other men laugh. I would smile and look down at my work and feel my face becoming hot. I don't think he was being unkind. Sometimes, when I am in a good mood, I act a fool. On the building sites, I would ape the exclamations of the Irish. If I had difficulty with a tool or a machine, I would put it down and stand up straight and shout, "Cunt of a yoke!" The Irish men would look at me in mock astonishment, and then look at each other and roar with laughter. "Gas man," they'd say, and shake their heads laughing. I would feel happy, and then remember to be ashamed of myself for being a clown to please other men. I am too far from my father's home and from my brother's grave. In the office where men and women go who have no work, a girl asked me for a number, then for a stamp, then for the name of my employer. I could understand. I had heard all of these words before. "Pokey Burke," she sighed. I looked at her in silence and shrugged. She rolled her eyes towards the ceiling. Then she smiled at me, but it was a smile that says, "I'm sorry." I didn't understand the next words she said, but her voice was kind. Shani whispered loudly and slowly from behind me, while the girl looked at her computer screen. "Hey Chief, what she's saying is, you don't exist." And all the men and women in the lines laughed. My father's herds were small and spread across a plain and a sweeping valley. There was not enough to sustain all of us, so my brother and I journeyed south to a city that was spreading outwards like a dirty puddle. We lived in a hut of galvanized metal and scrap wood, near to where a great building was being erected. Its foundations were deeper than I thought even an ocean could be. I could not see their lowest part. My brother and I carried blocks to masons, along planks suspended above nothingness. We became braver each day, and the other men began to respect us. You goatherds aren't bad, the boss said once. I felt pride and then foolishness. My brother must have misheard what the man said and taken his words for an insult. He cast aside his burden and struck the man in the face. Other men, anxious to be in good favour with the boss, turned on my brother and kicked and beat him. I fought until blood ran down my face and into my eyes and mouth, and my fists were raw and scorched with pain. My brother was almost unconscious when I dragged him clear of danger. There was a swelling on his forehead. I looked back from the street, and the men that had attacked us were already turned away, bent once more to their labouring. The fat man my brother had struck was rubbing his chin, pointing and shouting orders. My brother left our hut the next day and bought dirty vodka, brewed by a man in a small still across the street, beaten together from a vat and a stolen distiller. He sang scraps of folk songs that night, half remembered from our childhood. There was no music in his voice. He shouted and screamed the words and woke people from their sleep. "Shut up, Afanasieff, you fool," men said from inside their own shanties. No one had courage enough to stand before him, though. He staggered away from me as I reached for him to calm him and bring him inside. He fell and pushed me away as I tried to help. The swelling on his forehead had not reduced. The next day, a local militiaman and a regular policeman came to our muddy street and began to ask for relatives of Viktor Afanasieff. "He's my brother," I said. "Your brother is dead," the policeman said. The militiaman had a stubby rifle slung around his neck. He stroked it as though it were a pet and said, "Come with us." Victor had been found lying in a gap between two buildings at the centre of the town. He'd been beaten again and had suffocated in blood. I could never return to my home without my brother. I heard of men who were planning to travel to Western Europe. I asked them how this could be done, and they gave me a piece of paper with names, addresses and numbers. That was 4 years ago. When I first reached Ireland, I learned quickly how best to find employment. I took from others words and phrases that served me well for a while. Off the books, under the table, on the QT. One man can learn some trades by watching another man closely. I worked in 2 cities and then came to this village. There was work here and the air was sweet. I worked for Pokey Burke for nearly 2 years. Now I use the money I'd saved for food and to pay my rent, and I work some days for the Foreman again. Bobby. He calls me the best of the C2 boys. I don't know what this means. I smile and nod. I have learned the roads around this village. I know the way to a quay on the edge of a lake of placid water. There are wooden seats at this quay to sit on and look at the water. The evening sun turns it to a glistening, dazzling thing that has no place on this dull earth except in that short time before sunset. That light is a trick. If I were to swim to it or row out to put my hand upon it, it would be gone as I approached, and there would only be dark, cold water in its place. Across the bay there is another place, identical to the one where I sit. When the air is moist, the distant bank becomes magnified and seems closer, as do the dark hills behind it. When the air is dry, it moves away and could be another country across the sea. When it looks to be a distance that I could easily swim, I think of myself trying and of being seized halfway by a tightening of the muscles in my arms or legs, or by the panic of the realization that I had misjudged the distance, that I had been tricked by the landscape and the light. No one on the shore would see that I was struggling. No one would hear me cry for help. The road from the quay is steep and winding. Houses are hidden at the end of long avenues, lined with ancient trees, where I imagine families have lived, son after father, for years and years. These people are fixed, rooted, bound to a certain place. I think of my father's camp and the moving of the herds across thousands of miles of openness. I think of returning home and how I would be a burden and a shame to my family. At the cattle station, I would ask in which direction I must walk to reach my father's camp, and the men there would ask, with disgust upon their faces, why I had returned. My father and mother would not embrace me. "I'll stay here. I have the roads to walk and the clear air to breathe. I have the quiet lake and the light that dances on the water." I walked once from the house where I live, before I had learned the way the roads lie and the way that this land can turn around on itself. I was tired of the men in the house. They were drinking and shouting through all the hours of the night, and singing songs loudly of their different countries. A neighbour came to the door of the house, and I heard him saying, "The baby, the baby." The other men quietened and became sullen. Without songs, they drank more deeply. I decided to walk towards the rising sun. I crossed the road, away from the rows of houses of light timber and thin blocks, and entered a field ringed by trees. There was a river at the far side of the field. My eyes were deceived again, and I walked into a wet hollow in the field's centre, and over a small rise, and then down towards the river. Cows were standing at the muddy edge, drinking. They were fat and contented, full to bursting, waiting to be milked. The grass here is thick and long. I envied them. I found a way across the river over rounded stones and climbed the shallow far bank. I kept true east across more fields, and decided to make for the foothills of a small mountain where I had heard there was an old silver mine. I thought that by the time I'd reached those hills and sat for a while and walked back, that the other men would be asleep, and I could have a Sunday afternoon of peace. I would make my food and drink tea and look for words that I knew on a newspaper. I walked for hours and became lost. The fields dipped and rose and all looked alike. The hills seemed to draw no nearer. I came to a public house on a roadside. The Miner's Rest, it was called. "Where is this place?" I asked a man inside. "Shani," he said. I was walking. "I am lost," I said, in English. He seemed to understand my words. "Where are you from, boy?" "Caucasia," I said. "Where the fuck is that?" "Siberia," I said. "Jesus friend, you sure are fucking lost." And he roared with laughter, and the others in the bar laughed as well. And I don't know why, but I felt at once safe and foolish, and I laughed with them as they slapped my back. A man played a fiddle. He had a serious face, but his music was full of joy. At the next week's end, Pokey Burke gave me a lift to the house I shared. I had just finished shoring the foundations of a large house that would never be built. "I have great time for you," he said. "You are a fabulous worker." I don't know what fabulous is. "I know I owe you a few bob," he said. I understood this. "I'll sort you out next week, okay?" Sort you out means pay you in this land. He looked at me and smiled as he drove. I knew he was lying. I knew I would not see him again. But I said, "Okay, Pokey, okay," and I smiled back.